Hello, everyone, and welcome to what promises to be a captivating exploration of one of philosophy's most profound and influential works. Today, we embark on an intellectual journey into what we're calling the mind's architecture. Just as skilled architects design intricate structures with blueprints and precise measurements, our own minds, too, possess an intricate underlying structure, a hidden framework that fundamentally shapes how we perceive, understand, and interact with the world around us. Take a look at the striking image on the screen, a human profile overlaid with these precise, almost engineering-like lines and a golden spiral. This visually represents the core idea that our cognition isn't a chaotic mess, but rather a sophisticated system with inherent principles and organization. Our guide on this expedition will be one of history's most profound thinkers, Immanuel Kant, and his groundbreaking work, The Critique of Pure Reason. Kant famously didn't just ask what we can know, but perhaps more importantly, how we can know it, and crucially, what the very limits of that knowledge are. He challenged traditional approaches to philosophy, questioning the very foundations of human understanding itself. Have you ever wondered if there's an inherent, universal design to how we think? Are there built-in structures within our minds that predetermine certain aspects of our experience or how we construct reality? To truly grapple with the most fundamental philosophical questions, those concerning metaphysics, the nature of reality, or even morality, Kant argued that we must first turn inward. We must meticulously inspect the very capabilities and architecture of our own minds before we can even begin to understand what lies beyond them. On our last slide, we introduced Kant's revolutionary idea that the human mind isn't a passive recipient of information, but an active architect of our experience, structuring reality through its own inherent framework. Now, as we prepare to delve deeper into how this architecture works and what its limits are, Kant presents us with a crucial warning. He essentially says, before building a tower to heaven, we must inspect our materials. Think about that for a moment. What does it mean for us as seekers of knowledge to inspect our materials? In philosophy, the grand tower to heaven, the ultimate structure of knowledge, is often identified with metaphysics. As our slide explains, metaphysics is that ambitious branch of philosophy striving to understand reality at its most fundamental level, exploring concepts like existence, time, space, causality, and even God. For centuries, philosophers, in their eagerness to reach the heights of ultimate truth, often built dogmatically. They confidently used concepts and principles of reason, constructing elaborate systems without first pausing to assess the origin and nature of these very tools, these mental materials they were using. They didn't ask, are our building blocks sound? Do we truly understand where these ideas come from and what their inherent strengths and weaknesses are? As the text highlights, this approach is a recipe for disaster if our mental materials can't bear the weight of such lofty constructions. The result? Philosophers building conflicting towers, each claiming to touch the heavens, yet fundamentally unstable, leading to endless disputes and ultimately widespread skepticism. Kant saw this intellectual landscape as a battlefield, and he proposed a radical solution, a thorough inspection of our mental architecture itself before attempting to build anything further. This is precisely what we're about to undertake with Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. On our last slide, we established that metaphysics first demands an inspection of our mental capabilities. But what happens, historically, when philosophy fails to conduct that rigorous self-critique? The image before us vividly illustrates the outcome, a veritable battlefield of contradictory claims. Imagine two grand yet shattered intellectual structures. One, a Gothic cathedral, perhaps symbolizing traditional religious and metaphysical thought. The other, a classical palace, representing the towering systems of rationalism or scientific inquiry. Both lie broken, clashing, with fissures running through the very ground they stand on, illuminated by a stark, almost blinding light of unresolved conflict. Without a systematic critique of its own tools, without understanding the very architecture of our mind and its limits, philosophy, as this slide asserts, becomes a confusing battleground of dogmatic assertions. One brilliant philosopher argues compellingly that God must exist. Another, equally brilliant, posits that the universe could have created itself without any divine intervention. How do we adjudicate these profound, fundamental disagreements? This endless philosophical disagreement, these irreconcilable assertions, lead to a truly dangerous alternative: skepticism. Not just a healthy questioning, but a profound belief that when it comes to fundamental metaphysical truths, nothing can truly be known. And as we'll explore next, this creeping skepticism isn't just an abstract philosophical problem. It threatens the very foundations of both scientific understanding and deeply held religious beliefs. Building on our last point about how unexamined philosophy can lead to skepticism, this slide vividly illustrates its profound reach. Skepticism isn't just a theoretical exercise, it threatens the very foundations of both science and religion. Look at the cracking pillars representing these domains. The dissolving A to B in the middle visually cues the concept of causality, which is central to this threat. For religion, skepticism challenges beliefs in the metaphysical, concepts like God or the soul, which exist beyond our senses. Without empirical verification, these deeply held convictions become unsupportable. How, for example, can we scientifically prove the existence of a soul? The threat extends equally to science, specifically undermining the core law of causality, the idea that every effect has a cause. David Hume famously argued we don't observe a necessary connection between cause and effect, only patterns, one thing consistently following another. Our very notion of causality, he concluded, is a habit of mind, a metaphysical concept in itself, not an empirically verifiable law. This radical questioning of causality, the bedrock of scientific inquiry, severely destabilizes its perceived certainty. If our most fundamental assumptions about the world are based on habit, not absolute necessity, how can a priori knowledge, knowledge independent of experience and absolutely certain, truly be possible? This is the critical question Kant aims to tackle. Following our discussion of skepticism, which casts doubt even on fundamental concepts like causality, we're faced with a profound question. Can we truly know anything with certainty, entirely independent of our personal experiences? Look at the example on the slide. 7 plus 5 equals 12. This isn't just a pattern we've repeatedly observed, like the sun rising every day. We don't need to count 7 apples and then 5 more to confirm this truth. We know instinctively that this statement is universally true. Always and necessarily true. It couldn't be otherwise. This kind of knowledge, which we possess independent of any sensory experience, is what philosophers call a priori knowledge. And why is this so critical? Because if pure reason cannot secure even a basic mathematical truth like this, if mathematics itself is, as the slide says, built on sand, then what hope do we have for other forms of knowledge, whether in science, ethics, or even metaphysics? The central problem that arises here, and the very starting point for Kant's monumental work, is precisely this: how is such knowledge possible? How can our minds grasp truths that seem to exist independent of the world we perceive? This is the fundamental challenge Kant takes on, and his solution will reshape our understanding of the mind itself. Building on our last question about how a priori knowledge, knowledge independent of experience, is truly possible, Kant offers a radical and profound solution. He argues that, to save knowledge, we must first conduct a critique of pure reason. But what exactly does a critique of reason entail in this context? Kant proposes that reason must turn its critical, analytical gaze upon itself. Instead of simply using reason to understand the external world, it must look inward to understand its own structure, its own workings, and its own limits. He makes a crucial distinction here. This isn't about having ready-made, innate ideas that we're simply born with. Rather, Kant posits that a priori knowledge is actually produced by the mind's own internal mechanisms. If you look at the image, that blueprint of a brain with gears is a perfect metaphor for the intricate mental architecture Kant describes. So, while experience may chronologically precede our knowledge, for instance when we go to school to learn new things, our mind must already possess the fundamental machinery to process and make sense of that experience. Without that underlying structure, raw sensory input would just be chaos. It's not just what we know, but how we know it. Therefore, before we can confidently talk about the limits or possibilities of knowledge itself, we absolutely must investigate this fundamental mental machinery. What are its parts? How do they function? And how do they work together to construct our understanding of reality? This is the critical task Kant sets for us, and he begins by dissecting the mind into its primary faculties. So, how does Kant propose to save knowledge within his Critique of Pure Reason? He begins by dissecting the very architecture of the mind itself, outlining three fundamental faculties through which we engage with and process reality. First, we have sensibility. Represented by the eye icon, this is our capacity to receive raw data from the world. Think of it as the passive reception of sensations, the colors you see, the sounds you hear, the textures you feel, or the taste of food. It's the most basic level of experience, the immediate input from our senses. But raw sensory data alone isn't knowledge, is it? We need to organize it. This is where understanding comes in, symbolized by the gears. Understanding is the faculty that takes these raw sensations and imposes concepts upon them. It's what allows us to categorize and make sense of the sensory input. For example, recognizing a furry barking entity as a dog, or a particular emotion is happy. More than that, understanding combines these concepts to form judgments, so we can judge that if a dog wags its tail, it is happy. This faculty organizes our experiences into coherent thoughts. Finally, atop sensibility and understanding, we have reason, indicated by the three dots. Reason is the faculty that connects these individual judgments into logical chains, forming syllogisms or broader arguments. It's how we move from a specific judgment, like this dog is wagging its tail, and the general rule or judgment, if a dog wags its tail, it is happy, to the conclusive inference, therefore, this dog is happy. Reason seeks to unify and systematize our knowledge, pushing us toward broader principles and ultimate explanations. Notice the progression here, from raw input to conceptual organization to logical synthesis. This isn't a passive process of simply receiving information. Instead, as we'll explore next, Kant reveals how the mind is an active participant, fundamentally structuring the reality we experience. Having identified the mind's faculties in our last discussion, we now confront a central Kantian claim. The mind actively structures reality. It doesn't passively receive it. Observe the image before you. On the left, we see what Kant refers to as raw sense data, a chaotic, undifferentiated jumble of colors, sounds, and textures, just as our sensory organs initially receive it. Yet, we never actually experience the world as this disarray, do we? Why? Because as this data moves inward, our mind is already engaging. It's not a passive recipient merely reflecting what's out there, but rather an active organizer. It immediately imposes order, using its own preset templates or procedures. The central grid-like structure in the image perfectly symbolizes this internal architecture of the mind, actively shaping and giving form to that raw input. The outcome of this process is the coherent, recognizable tree on the right. This tree isn't just out there existing independently of us, It's a phenomenon, an experience constituted by our mind from that initial sensory chaos. In essence, we don't simply see a tree, our mind constructs this coherent perception. This brings us to Kant's critical inquiry. What precisely are these fundamental innate frameworks, these templates that the mind universally applies to every perception, making experience possible? That's what we'll explore next, starting with the most foundational of all, space and time. Building on our last point, that the mind isn't a passive receiver, but an active structurer of reality, Kant introduces two fundamental ways our mind organizes all experience: space and time. Think about it. How do we know one object is next to another, or that one event happened before or after something else? Kant argues that for us to even perceive things in this way, our mind must already possess the internal structures, the frameworks of space and time. They are not properties of the external world that we discover through our senses. Instead, they are a priori forms of our sensibility. This means they are inherent, pre-existing conditions of the mind prior to any particular experience that allow us to have experience in the first place. Look at the left image. We perceive objects as having dimensions and locations, existing out there in a structured expanse. This grid of space isn't something we find in raw sensation. It's the mental structure we impose on sensations to perceive them spatially. Similarly, on the right, our minds arrange events in a sequential order, a flow from before to after. Time isn't a stream flowing externally that we merely observe. It's the internal framework our mind uses to organize successions of events. These a priori forms of sensibility are, in Kant's famous metaphor, the canvas upon which all our sensory experience is painted. Without them, our perceptions would be a chaotic, undifferentiated blob. But simply having a canvas isn't enough to create a coherent picture. We also need tools to connect and understand the elements painted on that canvas. And that brings us to the mind's next level of structuring, the pure concepts of understanding. We've established that space and time are the innate frameworks through which we perceive the world. But how do we then make sense of those perceptions? How do we move from seeing disconnected events to understanding a coherent world? This brings us to Kant's powerful idea. The mind uses pure concepts like causality to forge connections. Our mind's faculty of understanding isn't a blank slate. It comes with its own a priori templates, foundational structures that aren't learned from experience. Consider the concept of causality. We don't simply observe events and then deduce cause and effect. Instead, Kant argues that a basic logical function, the if X, then Y template, is inherent to our minds. By turning inward and analyzing this universal way of connecting ideas, the mind forms the pure a priori concept of causality. It's a rule our mind applies to the world to understand it. These fundamental mental tools, concepts like unity, causality, and possibility, represented by these interlocking gears, are what Kant terms the categories of understanding. They are, quite literally, the mind's intrinsic rules for organizing and interpreting everything it experiences, turning raw data into meaningful knowledge. This radical proposition that our minds actively structure our experience of reality is central to what's often called Kant's Copernican revolution in philosophy, which we'll explore further next. In our previous discussion, we touched upon how our understanding employs fundamental concepts like causality to connect and organize our experiences. Now, let's dive deeper into perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of Kant's philosophy and the profound implications of his central idea that we see a world of cause and effect precisely because our minds are built to structure reality that way. Before Kant, philosophy generally assumed what we call the old model, illustrated on the left side of your screen. It proposed that our knowledge must simply conform to the object itself. Think of it like this. There's an external reality, an object, and our mind passively observes it. Our ideas become accurate when they perfectly mirror or conform to that external reality. We're essentially a blank slate, and the world imprints itself upon us. But Kant, with what he termed his Copernican revolution in philosophy, boldly suggested we try the opposite. As you see on the right, he flipped the script. Instead of knowledge conforming to objects, he argued that objects must conform to our knowledge. This doesn't mean we invent reality out of thin air, but rather that our minds are not passive receivers. Our minds are actively involved. They structure the raw sensory data we receive, making experience possible. This is a truly game-changing reversal. What does this mean for concepts like causality? Well, Kant argued that the law of causality, the idea that every event has a cause, appears to us as a fundamental law of nature, not because it's inherent in the thing in itself, independently of us, but because it's a first law of how our minds must experience reality. Our minds are pre-equipped with categories, like causality, that we impose on the chaotic flux of sensations, thus making coherent experience possible. So the world isn't just out there waiting to be perfectly mirrored by our minds. Instead, our minds are like active architects, shaping the very structure of the reality we perceive. It's an incredibly powerful idea. This crucial distinction between reality as it appears to us and reality as it might be in itself leads directly to Kant's famous distinction between what we can know and what remains forever beyond our grasp, a topic we'll explore next as we discuss phenomena and noumena. Following Kant's radical idea that objects must conform to our knowledge, we arrive at one of his most profound and enduring distinctions between phenomena and noumena. On the left, we have the world of phenomena. This is the world as it appears to us, as we experience it. Look at this beautiful, clear mountain valley. This is how our minds, through their inherent structures of space and time and our fundamental categories of understanding, such as causality, organize raw sensory data. This phenomenal world is the only one we can ever directly access, and, crucially, it's the subject of all our scientific inquiry and knowledge. It is knowable because our minds have already put their stamp on it, shaping it into something comprehensible. But what about the world as it truly is, independent of our minds? Can we ever truly grasp that? Kant called this the world of noumena, or the thing in itself. Imagine trying to see the world's true colors while wearing permanently red-tinted sunglasses, as the analogy on the right suggests. You can describe the red-tinted world, measure it, analyze it, that's the phenomenal world. But you can never truly know the unfiltered, absolute color of objects, the true, in-itself reality, because your means of perception inherently alter it. The misty mountains on the right visually represent this obscured, inherently unknowable reality. This distinction is central to Kant's philosophy. He's not denying that a world in itself exists, rather he's arguing that it is simply inaccessible to human reason. We can only ever know reality through the lens of our own cognitive architecture. This profound realization sets clear boundaries for human understanding, delineating precisely where reason can legitimately operate and where it cannot. Having distinguished between the phenomena we can experience and the noumena, or things in themselves that remain unknowable, Kant now draws a crucial boundary for human reason. He firmly asserts that reason's legitimate territory is the world of experience. Think of it this way, as illustrated by our image. Our metaphysical tower, the grand structure of human knowledge and understanding, can indeed be built, and built quite impressively. We can construct elaborate frameworks of thought, gather vast amounts of information, and make incredible discoveries. However, this tower has a definitive height limit. It can only extend so far. The foundations of this building are firmly planted in the world we perceive and interact with daily. Within this realm, the phenomenal world, we can achieve truly certain knowledge. Fields like mathematics and the natural sciences flourish here, giving us reliable insights into how our world operates. This is where reason excels, meticulously analyzing data, formulating laws, and predicting outcomes. But what happens when reason tries to venture beyond this legitimate territory? What happens when it attempts to speculate about the noumenal realm, those ultimate questions about God, the immortality of the soul, or the ultimate origins of the universe? Kant argues that it enters not a realm of deeper truth, but a land of illusion. Why? Because our reason, with its categories of understanding and forms of intuition, is simply not equipped for that task. It lacks the empirical data, the sensory input, the very raw material it needs to construct valid knowledge about such transcendent matters. So this is Kant's profound conclusion. Reason is powerful, but it has specific boundaries. And by understanding these limits, we can better appreciate its true strength and the kind of knowledge it can legitimately provide. This demarcation, as we'll see next, is precisely how Kant aims to secure knowledge from the pitfalls of endless philosophical disputes. So, if reason operates within the strict bounds of experience, what are the profound implications of Kant's critical revolution? This is where Kant truly secures knowledge by limiting its scope, performing a brilliant philosophical maneuver that balances certainty with humility. Visually, the scales perfectly capture this synthesis. Solid weights symbolize the certainty he restores to science, while the delicate, abstract form represents the vital humility required for metaphysics. What were the triumphs of this rebalancing? Firstly, skepticism is defeated. For centuries, philosophers grappled with the very possibility of certain knowledge. Kant's groundbreaking answer: we gain certain knowledge of causality, space, time, and mathematics not from external facts, but because these are the fundamental laws by which our minds structure experience. Science, therefore, is not just saved, but grounded in an undeniable framework. Isn't it remarkable how he turns the very structures of our mind into the guarantors of scientific truth? Secondly, dogmatism is humbled. Unchecked metaphysical speculation often led to endless, contradictory claims about ultimate reality. Kant definitively demonstrates that pure reason, when it tries to transcend the phenomenal world, inevitably falls into error. Reason must learn its limits, acknowledging its domain is the world of appearances, not the inaccessible thing in itself. Does this mean metaphysics is irrelevant? Not at all. It just means reason, left unchecked, cannot penetrate the ultimate nature of things. And finally, perhaps most inspiringly, a new space is created. By clearly defining reason's boundaries in science, Kant doesn't destroy profound belief. Instead, by limiting reason's theoretical domain, he creates room for faith, grounding it firmly outside scientific proof, often in the demands of our moral consciousness. This isn't merely a compromise, it's a powerful, liberating synthesis. It's a testament to the mind's active role, securing objective science while opening a profound new pathway for human meaning and conviction. These insights, the active mind, knowledge limits, and a new foundation are what we'll distill in our final summary. As we conclude our exploration of Kant's monumental critique, let's consolidate these three core insights that fundamentally reshape our understanding of knowledge, reality, and the very nature of the mind. Firstly, Kant reveals the mind as an active architect. It's not a passive mirror, but an active builder. Our minds don't just receive reality, they structure our experience using pre-existing frameworks like space, time, and causality. These aren't external properties of the world, but the very lenses through which we construct our understanding of all experience. Secondly, this architectural role implies that knowledge has boundaries. We can achieve certain, verifiable knowledge of the world as it appears to us, what Kant calls phenomena. But reality in itself, the thing in itself, or noumena, independent of our minds, is rigorously shown to be unknowable. This isn't a defeat, but a profound clarification of reason's legitimate scope. What does this mean for our pursuit of truth? And finally, these insights provide a new foundation for science and philosophy. By grounding the certainty of science in the stable, universal laws of the mind itself, Kant secures empirical knowledge. Simultaneously, he redefines metaphysical inquiry. It shifts from futile speculation about the unknowable to a crucial self-examination of reason's own capacities and limits. These three insights offer more than historical philosophy. They are vital lenses for understanding our own cognitive processes, for appreciating the limits and potentials of human knowledge, and for engaging in critical thinking in any field. Kant's architecture of the mind invites us to continually explore how we know what we know, urging us to build upon the enduring foundations he meticulously laid. Thank you.